Piper, welcome to the podcast. It is so awesome to have you here to celebrate the release of Goalie Interference at the start of hockey season.
Yay! Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So I adored Goalie Interference so much. I mean, I reviewed it last week and kind of was just like all gaga over it. But for those who maybe missed that or need to hear it from you guys, tell us what this book is all about in your words.
When we were writing Off the Ice, we both love goalies. Like, it's just a thing. We have goalie love. And we wanted to write a rivalry between two on the same team. It was just like, that was the initial idea, the kernel that started it all off. Yeah, that's where the initial idea came from. And we just worked to develop it from there. Figuring out at first, like, do we want them on the same team? Do we want them on opposing teams? How's that going to work? And it just made more sense to put them on the same team for the time that they would get to spend together. Yeah, and then it kind of just went from there. And the characters, Ryu was, of course, introduced in Off the Ice. And then Emmett developed, as we were plotting. And we loved them both right away and their chemistry and their banter and everything else. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun to kind of take it and run with it.
We liked making Emmett from the minor leagues because I love when goalies get like their big break and get to move up from like the AHL. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted it to be this like hotshot goalie who was coming in with a lot of confidence, but also had like not a chip on his shoulder, but something to prove, and was really just gung-ho about being the team starter, kind of against the more like level-headed guy who's already been there. So that adds some nice tension.
Mm-hmm. You build so much tension in this book in so many ways. How did that manifest while you were plotting? How many stress points were you trying to come up with for these two?
I feel like they did it.
Yeah, I think so. Because, I mean, when we initially plotted, obviously we knew that who was going to be the starter was going to be the big point of contention between them. And then eventually we had to make the decision of, what happens during the playoffs and go from there. And so those were the two big things that we initially came up with while plotting. And everything else just kind of happened, organically as we wrote.
Mm-hmm. And I love how you handled time in this book, because it's a standard, word count, page count romance, and yet you covered the hockey season here.
It's nice to have like kind of a idea of how much time needs to pass, but it's also kind of stressful because we would plot the thing and be like, wait a minute, they haven't played hockey in like 3 months. What are we doing? Or like, wait, where are they right now? Or had a holiday just happened? Because it goes by so fast, I think, when you're playing it or when you think about the season, it's it's only so many months, but then to write out the plot points of somebody getting in a relationship often doesn't happen in that small of a time period.
Yeah, and we had to go back through the manuscript and mark like timelines, like, okay, right now we're in October and right now we're in November, and just mark the significant time periods. Otherwise, like she said, we'd be like, oh, wait, when are we in the season? What's happening? Did Christmas pass? Did Thanksgiving pass? You know what I mean? That had to be something that we had to be aware of and kind of track throughout the writing of the book, because we wanted it to be over the course of the season, because that's kind of close to what we did for Off the Ice too. Obviously, that one started a little earlier because of the summer classes and stuff, but the whole meat of the book happened mostly throughout the season itself. So we kind of wanted to keep that as a theme too.
I love the diversity that you got here between Ryu and Emmett also. It's something we don't see enough in romance anyway, right? Seeing persons of color in these lead roles. But honestly, it's also not that common in the NHL either to have persons of color. What was your origin for the pairing? As you noted, Ryu came from Off the Ice, but then in developing Emmett.
Well, I'm Latinx, and I consider myself a person of color. And as a hockey fan, I mean, it's hard to deny that the league is extremely, extremely white. Like, there are very few players of color, and they're few and far between. You're lucky if you get two on the same team, and sometimes even one. And we wanted to, because hockey romance in general tends to be very white, and I see very few characters of color. And so we wanted to focus on that. We wanted to make sure that we included some of the men of color that are actually in the game and playing, and who have played historically in the game. We wanted to just do a little nod towards them, and also just because I am a person of color. My whole family's made up of brown people, various shades of brown, and we're beautiful, I think. And I just wanted to spread some of that love and get some of that representation in there. So, Ryu we had already decided he was Japanese American in the first book. And then Emmett, yeah, he just kind of, I don't know when we decided that he would be a black man. We kind of just, at one point while talking and plotting, we decided to go for it. And then, the whole conflict with his father and the football aspect and all of that other stuff just kind of developed from there. And then we just went for it. We just really wanted to focus on two men of color in the sport, especially because the next book, it's once again back to two characters that are white. And so, yeah, that was our main motivator there, was just to get some representation out there in a league that you don't see very many people of color playing in.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there have been and are still. I think we wanted to be like, hey, there are players of color out there. And I know Ryan Reeves is one of my favorite players, and he's black. And then I was thinking of the Blackhawks goalie, was it Ray Emery? Yeah, him and Ryan Reeves especially, and like Evander Kane were a couple of the ones I was thinking of. So we definitely wanted to introduce something a little less white.
And I liked a lot what you did with Emmett and his dad as well, and that whole dynamic. Overall, I really like what you did with the parents in this story, both having kind of their own things going on with what their kids were doing.
Yeah, we definitely wanted there to be a conflict that made sense for them. I think when you're someone who's a professional athlete, it is so hard to do. I mean, it's just impossible to make it with the odds. It seems like there's so many hockey players, but really, if you think about all the kids playing hockey, to even get there, you have to be super dedicated. And the idea of being that dedicated without entirely all the support was interesting to me. And also having somebody understand sports, but then wanting you to play a different sport. I just liked the idea of that kind of parental conflict with them, where it was I want you to do what I did because you're a great athlete, but why do you want to do this sport that I don't like? I just thought that was interesting. Or we both did.
Now, you're both hockey fans. What research did you have to do here? Because this was beyond the game itself, because you really delved into a lot of training stuff that I, as a fellow hockey fan, really enjoyed reading.
Piper is really good at that. I have to tell you, they were finding links and putting it in the document for the head. What was that called, Piper?
The head trajectory stuff.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, we love goalies. I'm also kind of anal retentive, and I like to research things. That's just my personality. So even before we started working on this story, I had done some reading about Devin Dubnyk, who plays for the Wild, as their goalie, and he had talked in a couple of interviews about how he went and did this head trajectory stuff and how it helped improve his game so much. So I read a couple of articles about that and just started looking into various ways that goalies train and what they do and how they try to improve over time. And yeah, I wouldn't say that it was totally intensive research, but I did do some reading and research into it to see what would be going on with them behind the scenes and what would a goalie try to improve upon and all of that stuff.
And a lot of the whole tandem thing was something that one of my teams, I'm a Bruins fan and a Blues fan. One of the things the Blues did a couple of years ago was that's how they were trying to figure out who their starter was through the whole season. They would do a tandem and they'd switch off the players so that if Jake Allen got a win, then he got to start the next night. And if he didn't get a win, then the other one started. And we thought that was really interesting because you'd think that would ruin a team's mojo, but it actually it was interesting how that affected their team and how they would go forward and play that way. And I think we liked that idea for trying to get both of them starting time.
Yeah, it just made me wonder, how do you get chemistry going if you're constantly switching goalies? How does that work? And it did seem to work pretty well for them, throughout the season. And that seemed like a good way to kind of ramp up the tension between our characters as well. Because if one of them had just been the starter from the get-go, where would the competition be? So, yeah, it just seemed like the most ideal scenario to have them actively competing with each other, but also against each other throughout the season.
I like how it takes some of the workplace tropes we've seen in the past, where you might have somebody in the corporate world vying for a position with the person that they're romantically linked to, but to see it in sports, which is so hyper competitive anyway, it just really amped the whole thing up, and how they worked to build a relationship while all this stuff is happening at work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would stress me out. There's no way.
Right?
Nope.
But it also made for some of the best scenes in the book, too, which I'm not going to spoil, but that some of that push-pull as they kind of root for each other, but then want it for themselves, and some of their internal dialogue on that is just epic.
Yay.
Hey, thank you.
Now, for those who missed Off the Ice, and shame on them if they have, tell folks a little bit about Tristan and Sebastian's story, because we see more of them in Goalie Interference.
Tristan is an NHL player who has decided to take some classes in case he needs a career after hockey, in case of injury or just retirement early or whatever, because hockey players don't tend to play super long. And so he's taking some classes at a local college in Georgia, and he ends up in a sociology class taught by Sebastian Cruz, and then they kind of end up having the hots for each other, but don't do anything until Tristan's done with the class. And so it's kind of like Tristan's romance with a not even understanding sports, has never been to a hockey game, professor of sociology, and how they sort of fall in love.
And it was so sweet how Sebastian got to figure out hockey.
Yes.
And we have to give some kudos to Kurt Graves in all this.
He's so great.
He's the voice of the Hattrick series so far. His off the ice performance was excellent, and I've heard the preview of Goalie Interference with him, and part of me wishes I hadn't read the book and had him read it to me instead.
Oh, I loved that sample so much. I was super excited to when they sent us that link. It sounds so good. So I'm looking for. Sometimes I get weird about listening to audiobooks of my own work because it gives me like this secondhand embarrassment kind of thing. I don't know, but I do love his voice so much that I probably will listen to that audiobook just to hear it and hear how he narrates the story. He did such a great job with Off the Ice, so I'm excited.
I can listen to them of mine, but I can't listen to like any of the sex scenes, which is ridiculous because I wrote them. But like the second somebody starts reading one that I have written, I can't handle it. I remember the first time I ever listened to one, which was for Breakaway, and I was legitimately hiding under a blanket. I could not handle hearing like him talking about them kissing. I don't even know why. Like it was so weird. I can listen to other people's audiobooks and that have sex scenes in them totally fine, but my own, nope.
And with Goalie Interference in particular, the thing I want to hear is how he does the banter between Ryu and from the angry stuff to the sweet stuff to some of the bedroom talk. It's what I'm going to end up and just listen to anyway, because I'm addicted to Kurt's voice.
And he's just so nice. He did, my favorite thing is he did Whiskey Business, one of my books, which had all these puns about Gallows Grove was the name of the town. So they were like death puns, and his last name is Graves. I don't know.
Perfect.
I just really like that. Mm-hmm. He just managed to have like a perfect Kentucky accent. And I don't think he's from there, but he did such a good job. Yeah, I love how he makes every character sound totally different and like recognizable, and how he does that. That's just so impressive to me. Is
there more Hattrick coming? I think I heard you say a little something about another book as we were talking. Who gets to pair up, or can you tell us?
Oh, we can tell you because we've talked a little bit about it on Twitter. So we've talked about it, and it's Daniel's book. And we're mid-writing it right now. He pairs up with a character that has as yet not been introduced. Basically, it's him reconnecting with his childhood sweetheart that he had crush on until he was about 13 when he moved away to join like a hockey developmental league up north because he's originally from Florida. So he reconnects with a boy he knew, and that was his best friend when they were kids, and that he had their first kiss with at age 13, that shy first crush, first love sort of thing going on. And they reconnect as adults. And yeah, it goes from there. There's dolphins involved because Micah works for an aquarium, and it's not your typical aquarium. It's like rehabbing animals that are hurt, sea turtles, all that kind of stuff. Dolphins, they rehab and re-release if possible. So he's a marine biologist, and that's what he does. And yeah, it's probably to date going to be our sweetest story. There's a very different dynamic between them than there are with Tristan, Seb, and also Ryu and Emmett. It's just very kind of like sweet and fun, and they've got this whole like, oh, we were friends before and we're reconnecting as friends, but we're also falling in love. Like that whole thing's going on. So it's been a joy to write them, and a lot different than writing the other 2 books for sure.
But we wanted there to be a whole mix of like different kinds of stories, and and this one is it's like so cute. It's really cute.
It sounds just adorable. I mean, somebody who works in an aquarium with dolphins, and I love second chance stories. Sign me up. When does this come out?
It's August 2020. So yeah, it's almost still a year away.
My goodness.
But we're working on it.
Yep. Hopefully
it'll be worth the wait.
So does Hattrick get to go beyond 3, or are you stopping at the logical 3?
Well, never say never. I mean, we do have the Hattrick. It was originally plotted to be a trilogy, obviously. The Hattrick is the whole 3 goals by the same player thing. So that was our initial plan. But over the course of writing these books, we really, really fell in love with Morley so much. Mr. Trevor Morley, we love him. And I've seen some early reviews of Goalie Interference and people eagerly talking about they hope book 3 is about Morley, and we're kind of like, oh, but
I feel bad.
I'm feeling bad now that we don't currently have a plan to write his book. That's not outside of the realm of possibility. It could just be a spin-off, standalone title that we decide to do eventually. So yeah, we'll see.
I could see a Morley book. I'd like to see somebody to come in and try to tame him just a little bit. So how did your writing partnership start?
Well, we became friends when I started publishing, and then was on Facebook, and I had read some of Piper's books, and then we became like Facebook friends, and then I realized they liked hockey, and we made a bet. Do you remember this, Piper? And I lost, and I had to have a Blackhawks icon for like a week. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Because they beat the Blues. And that was kind of how we started. That was kind of how we started like talking about writing. Because I'm like, I love writing hockey books. Want to write a hockey book? And then we just kind of went from there.
I was new to hockey. I was just like brand spanking new with my training wheels on and didn't know a thing. And I just suddenly decided I want to write a hockey romance. And this was even prior to the conversation with Avon that we should work together. So, naturally, when the subject of us working together on a hockey romance came up, I was very much excited to do so. And Blackhawks were the team that got me into hockey. They're the first team that I fell in love with. I've been to so many games. I have multiple jerseys. I've been to their practice arena. Like, I love them. I have a vial of the melted ice from when they won the cup the last time. Eventually, I moved away from them. Avon likes to say the team finds you, the team of your heart finds you. And that is how it happened with me with the Wild. And then also the Blues. I really love them. And actually, Off the Ice, and we've talked about this in promo for Off the Ice before, was inspired by a Blues player, Colton Parayko, who was during the playoffs one season going to school, studying for finals. And we were just like so inspired by the idea of this hockey player, like bringing his book along everywhere on the planes, on the buses, as they're going to games. He's studying in the dressing room. Like all of that was just really inspirational to us. We thought it made for such a good premise. So that's how Off the Ice, the original idea even began, was we both liked the Blues. We both loved Colton Parayko, and we loved what he was doing. It was just, I thought, like, just what dedication does it take to do that? So that's how the character of Tristan came about. We went from there. We just plotted it out and then Off the Ice.
What got you into hockey, Piper? I mean, 5 years ago isn't that long.
Yeah.
What was the turning point for that?
Okay, so this is kind of weird. I got a weird start into hockey, but I used to be on Tumblr all the time. And basically, I started falling in love with a couple of players through like hockey RPF and that sort of thing, and like memes and interview clips. So one of those players was Jonathan Toews, of course, captain of the Blackhawks. And so when I was reading some of these stories, I suddenly just had this, like, I want to write hockey romance. I can do this. I want to do it. And then I had the moment of like, but I don't know anything about the sport. I've never watched a game. I don't have a clue. So my husband's a longtime fan of hockey. The Red Wings have been his favorite team since he was a kid. He loves Steve Yzerman. I told him, I want to write a hockey romance, so you need to teach me about hockey. And so it kind of went from there. We started watching Blackhawks games, and he started teaching me about the sport as we were watching, like, what's icing? What's this? You know, like I didn't have a clue. So he started teaching me, and what started off as just kind of like a research endeavor turned into me falling so hard for this sport to the point that now I have like 2 hockey-related tattoos and jerseys and all this. Like I said, I've been to arenas in multiple states. I've been to hockey games in Missouri. I've been to hockey games just all over. Like I just fell completely and utterly in love with the sport. I became a fan because I wanted to write it.
That's awesome. I love that that wanting to write the book got you into the game. Avon, what's your origin story on that? I think I've heard it before, but I don't think we've talked about it on the podcast.
Okay, so I'm from the South where no one plays hockey. And when I moved to Missouri, my now husband, who was my then boyfriend, took me to a hockey game. I think I've told this story where I kept asking him what would happen if the ice cracked. And he was like, well, they bring out the Zamboni. And he's telling me, and I said, well, but like, what happens if it like really cracks? And he's like, I don't understand what you're saying. And then finally he looked at me and he's like, you think there's a swimming pool under there, don't you? Yes, I do. I thought that there was water underneath the ice, and I was 19, which is probably real dumb of me, but it's true. So I went from that to being able to tell you what like a Corsi statistic is. But I have a very good friend who's Canadian, and she used to work late night shifts, and she would text me and say, can you tell me the score of the Canucks games? Like she was a big Canucks fan, and so I would like text her the score, and she'd be like, okay, tell me who scored a goal. And so I would tell her. And so then she's like, you should really watch this. She'd probably really like it. And so I started watching Canucks games to give her updates of what was happening with her team while she was at work. And I started getting really into it. And then she's like, well, you're going to have to pick a team because you have to have one. And being someone from a crazy sports family, so I understand overinvesting in sports completely. So, but I've never been able to like choose my own team. So I'm like, okay, well, who's the team everybody hates? And at that point, they were like, it's the Bruins. So I said, okay, that'll be my team. And so then that's the year the Bruins beat the Canucks in the Stanley Cup final. So I think I've come full circle, but also she's never quite forgiven me for that. But yeah, it was really weird. It's like just by trying to be like a nice friend and like give her some updates. And then I really liked the sport because it moved super fast. I liked the rivalries. And one of the reasons why I became such a big Bruins fan is I love the historical rivalry with the Habs. Which is why, I mean, I just love that kind of stuff. It's like, oh. And I started writing minor league hockey, which I really like. And we have a team here, and I would go a couple times to see them. And I loved the idea of people playing this like really fast, dangerous sport for like $500 a week in these tiny arenas with these like ridiculous names, and then in the South. So I was just fascinated by that whole thing. And that's why I ended up writing Scoring Chances, was because I was so into minor league hockey.
So we'll swing it back around to the writing now. As you got together to work on these books, what's been your process around figuring out the plots and then who's writing what and how all that meshes together?
The first thing we normally do with any new idea that we have is basically talk out the whole story. We do like a broad outline of the entire story from start to finish. And then from there, we usually break it down into smaller chapter outlines, and then decide either who's writing what chapter or who's writing who. And the way it's worked out for us so far is that we've for each book taken on a specific character. So in Off the Ice, I wrote Tristan, and in Goalie Interference, I wrote Ryu. And we just write our chapter, pass it on to the other person. They read and give feedback, and we continue until we're done.
Was there any discussion who would write what character, or did they just end up speaking independently to you and saying, write me, write me?
I think it was that.
With Off the Ice, I was like, oh my God, obsessed with Colton Parego and this whole idea, and I really wanted to write him. And then we decided that Seb would be Puerto Rican, and you think it would make sense that the Puerto Rican person would write the Puerto Rican character, but since Avon has a background in academia and stuff like that, I felt like she would be better fit for the professor character. And so they kind of just each called to us in their own ways. And then because I wrote Tristan and Ryu was around during his scenes mostly, it just kind of naturally happened that I would write Ryu for the second book.
Is there a scene or part of a scene that the other one wrote for Goalie Interference that you love?
I love Olive Piper Seeds, but one of my favorites in that book is the one where they go to the party and they're having like the backyard pool party, and Ryu is just not having it with Emmett, and then Morley's being his Morley self. Piper writes the banter with the team really well. It's like chapters, one of the earlier chapters in Goalie Interference. I just love that whole thing where they go and Sebastian is like, you will call me Sebastian, not, the names they're going to come up with for him. So Cruzy, I think someone tries to call him. But Cruzy, yeah, I love that. Yeah. I love that chapter.
And this one is pretty far into the book, but there's a scene where Morley and Emmett have a whole conversation about bisexuality and labels and what does it mean if this, and they're discussing, just like relationship issues and, like I said, labels, and Morley's trying to figure himself out and all this other stuff. And I loved that entire scene so much, everything about it from start to finish. That's probably my favorite scene of Avon's in the book.
Thanks, friend.
What is it about hockey that has actually attracted both of you to writing about the sport?
Well, for me, I don't really know much about any other sports. I've been tempted to write a football duology, and I've kind of got a tentative idea for that. But again, this is another sport where I'd have to learn it in order to write it, because I've watched games with my husband and I never know what's happening. Like I said, for me, I came to the sport because I liked some of the players. And so I was drawn to just wanting to write about these players that played this game that they happen to be playing. And so once I started watching the game and I got into it, it's fast, stuff is always happening. And unlike baseball, where it's like you're sitting there for long periods of time where nothing is happening, hockey's just like bam, 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 start to finish. And that just appealed to the part of my brain that's easily distractible, because I can be very just easily distracted. And so a game, in order to hold my attention, has to be a very rapid pace. And there's got to be a lot of stuff going on. And I don't know, I just fell in love with it. And it was the first sport that I ever wanted to write.
I think mine is, I grew up watching college sports, football and basketball. And what I liked about hockey was, because hockey isn't as super popular as it is like in Canada, I didn't know the players, but I knew the teams. And I'm so used to cheering for teams as like the name on the, the jersey, not the player, that for some reason hockey just spoke to me about in that same sort of way. So I really liked the team aspect of it, even though so it's almost like the opposite, because I didn't know the players. I liked that, but then agreed, I liked it that it was super fast, and also there was fighting, but there was fighting with rules and respect, and so people would get in a fight and then laugh about it and smile afterwards, and there was just, I found something delightful about taking out aggression and having rules of conduct that was all very no, we're going to do this, but then afterwards I'm going to give you a pat on the back. It's absurd in this kind of wonderful way. And I think we all wish sometimes at our jobs that we could just deck someone and then have it be okay.
Yeah, have it be A-okay.
For sure.
Yeah. Which everyone should watch Ice Guardians. It was on Netflix, but it's a great documentary about hockey enforcers, and it will really make you think about fighting in hockey and what it came from. And I mean, I'm a Bruins fan, so obviously I like fighting in hockey, but.
Oh, it's great. We actually have matching friend tattoos of a quote from that documentary.
Yeah, we sure do.
What's the quote?
With a little more fire. And it would make sense when you actually watch the documentary. But the first time I ever heard it, I cried.
Me too.
When you see it in context, I would highly recommend that you check that out. It was great.
It's a great, great documentary.
I'll look that up, and we'll link it in the show notes as well so people can find it. So what's coming up next for you two together and separately? We talked a little bit about the next Hattrick book, but what else is in the offing from both of you?
Well, I have some books that I need to re-release. I do have about 10 or 11 books that need to be revised and put out there again in the world so that I'm, have my backlist back up and running. Aside from that, I was asked to take part of a cool shared universe thing that I can't share too many details about, but it involves cowboys. I can share that much, and I'm really excited and hoping that I can manage to get that story done and be part of it, because everything that I've read about the world building and everything that's involved so far has me really pumped for that. So there's that, and then Avon and I have a couple different projects, not any official starting dates, but we have a book about a couple of bakers that we want to write. And then we hope to get to the sequel to Permanent Ink at some point. because we did have 2 additional books planned in that series, so hopefully we can get to that eventually. And that's all the major stuff on my end right now.
I have the Ballad of Whiskey Jacks, which is the sequel to the Love Song of Sawyer Bell, that I am working on. The 6th Scoring Chances book, which one day I will finish. Also, I am working with my friend Emily Rossman, and we are writing a kind of ridiculous but fun second chance ex-Coast Guard tour guides fall in love in a small town in Alaska book that we're actually almost done with. So we'll be seeing what we want to do with that when it's finished. And that's, I think, about all I could think of. I'd love to do something with like professional wrestling. I got into that a lot, so I'm trying to drag Piper into writing some stuff with me about that.
I want to read all that. The Alaska book in particular sounds kind of fun, and I'm super excited to know that there's a 6th Scoring Chances book out there.
There is a Xavier's book. I've started it and stopped it a couple times, and I think I have finally figured out for like and I say this for the 5th time, but I have been going back and forth on what the plot is. I know everything that happens in his story. It's just the other half, and I think I'm finally getting a handle on it. So that'll be good, because I'd love to get that done and have that out there to have that complete.
And what's the best way for everyone to keep up with you 2 online so they can know when this stuff is coming?
I'm at Piper Vaughn on Twitter, and that's probably the place I'm most active, although I've been taking breaks because, you know, all of the doom and gloom news in the world is kind of a lot to take on Twitter sometimes. Yeah. So I have to take breaks. I really love Instagram, and I'm around there a lot too. I think Piper.Vaughn there. And then I'm on Facebook too. Search the name and you can find me.
I'm also on Twitter at Avon Gale Writes. And I take breaks because I get stressed out by Twitter. Not it like just by the world being on Twitter and everything. It's and I just relaunched my website, which is avongalewrites.com. And I do have a newsletter, which I think the sign up should be on my website, but Twitter is normally the best way to find me yelling about video games and hockey.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to all that in the show notes. Thank you 2 so much for being here, and best of luck with the Goalie Interference release. Such a good book. Everyone needs to go pick that up.
Thank you so much.
Yes, it was fun.